The hose went dry the moment I tried to water my roses, on Memorial Sunday, of all days. Name's Lester, 72, retired postal worker. The sun was hot, the spigot was colder than the iced oatmeal I hadn't touched since breakfast. That yellow HOA notice flapped next to my flag like it belonged there. Ever had a rule remind you who's really in charge? It was Memorial Sunday, and the flags were up, yet no water flowed from the garden hose in Lester's backyard. The hose twitched once, then sagged like a tired snake. Lester Barnett frowned, twisted the spigot knob back and forth, then crouched, knees creaking in protest, to inspect the nozzle. Nothing. Not a drop. On a day like this, of all days. The air smelled of clipped grass and old brass polish, the kind his late wife used to rub gently on the family flagpole. Last year, by this hour, Eleanor would have already soaked the flower beds with practiced grace, talking softly to the petunias like old friends. Now they drooped quietly in the sun, thirsty and unspoken to. Lester wiped his hands on his khakis and stood slowly. Across the street, Mr. Delgado adjusted a small Marine Corps flag on his porch. 2 houses down, the Meltons waved from their bench swing. The neighborhood, still and bright, wore the hush of a Sunday meant for reverence, not paperwork. He stepped toward the mailbox, only to pause. Something fluttered there, held beneath the rusted metal lid with blue painter's tape. Not the usual newsletter, this was printed on cream paper with a sharp red border. HOA Form 112B Water Restricted. Section 4B Noncompliance. Lester read it once. Then again. Apparently, his irrigation system had triggered an unauthorized flow event, violating seasonal drought moderation rules that, to his knowledge, had never been discussed. Unauthorized, he muttered, tucking the notice into his back pocket. At Marty's Grill, the Sunday crowd buzzed with its usual order: oatmeal for Lester, with 2 slices of buttered wheat toast and a cup of decaf that tasted faintly of paper. He sat at his usual corner booth, underneath the photo of the 1972 Little League champs. Across the aisle, Edna Harris whispered, "They raised the quarterly fee again. No warning. My Billy's furious." "The newsletter never came," chimed in Walter, scratching his neck. "And now they want us to submit paint samples?" Lester stirred his oatmeal. The hum of conversation washed over him like soft static. This used to be a neighborhood, he thought. Now it was a managed portfolio. The bell above the door jingled once, sharp and brief. Joanne Ritter entered in crisp beige slacks and a HOA pin that gleamed like a deputy's badge. She made a direct line to Lester's table, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Barnett," she said, her voice tight as starched linen, "I hope you received the form this morning." "I did," he said, not looking up. "Irrigation regulations are outlined in the appendix of our April 15 bulletin. All properties north of Civic Creek fall under Section 4B now." "I live south of it." Joanne blinked. "That boundary was redrawn last quarter." Lester finally looked at her. "Without telling anyone?" She smiled without warmth. "It was posted online. We encourage residents to check the portal weekly." He didn't reply. Instead, he tore a paper napkin slowly in 2, then folded both halves as if he might use them later. Joanne took the silence as dismissal, nodded curtly, and moved on to Walter's booth. When Lester got home, the house felt unusually quiet, despite the open windows and the hum of a distant lawnmower. He took out a notepad and scribbled a few words, crossed them out, then rewrote the first line. "Rachel, need to ask you about HOA rules. They're charging me for watering roses." He looked at the photo on the side table, Rachel at her law school graduation, all wide grin and arms looped around Eleanor. She had promised to come visit. "Soon, Grandpa," she'd said last time. But soon had always meant work first, life later. His phone buzzed. A familiar tone, "Rachel." "Hey, Grandpa," her voice crackled cheerfully through the speaker. "I got your email. Are they seriously fining you for using your hose today?" "They are," he replied, stirring the decaf he hadn't finished that morning. "Claimed I broke something called Section 4B. What even is that?" Lester paused, then chuckled without mirth. Some line they moved when we weren't looking. I'm coming down next weekend, she said. We'll sort this out. I've been meaning to look into this HOA thing anyway. He didn't speak for a second. Then, softly, almost to himself, he said. She's coming home, Lester mutters, folding Rachel's email with a hint of pride and dread. Rachel's boots crunched against the dry grass as she stepped out of her car. Civic Circle hadn't seen water in days. The heat pressed down like a held breath, shimmering above the pavement and licking at the corners of lawns now yellowed and brittle. Rachel paused by the curb, blinking behind her sunglasses, letting the scene settle. The porch where her mother once curled up with lemonade and a summer novel now sat bare, the swing gone, the flagpole missing its colors. Her grandfather hadn't exaggerated. The place looked sunburnt and scolded. She opened the trunk, tugged out her overnight bag, and walked slowly up the walkway. A small sign next to the mailbox read, in stiff Helvetica, "No flags, signs, or hangings on visible porch surfaces, HOA Rule 9F. The font was unfriendly, official in the most alienating way. She narrowed her eyes at it. Lester answered the door before she could knock. He was already in his afternoon shirt, short sleeves, tucked in, and a fresh band-aid marked the top of his hand. Didn't think you'd actually make the drive, he said, but his voice betrayed a softness. I told you I would. She stepped inside. You weren't kidding. It feels like August out here. They say we're under conservation status. New initiative. He motioned toward the kitchen. Want a cold drink? Over a lukewarm glass of iced tea, he'd used the last of the cubes yesterday. Rachel looked through the window. Every house had curtains pulled tight. The yards looked muted, as if someone had wrung all color from them. Later that afternoon, while Lester napped in his recliner, Rachel took a walk to reacquaint herself with Civic Circle. It didn't take long to notice the signs. Not just the water bans, but ones taped to windows, no seasonal lighting without permit. Mowing height strictly 2 inches. Bird baths temporarily suspended. Mrs. Doyle was hunched over her rose bushes with a plastic watering can, looking both ways like a teenager sneaking out after curfew. Rachel Barnett, she said softly. You're Eleanor's girl. I am. She'd be ashamed of what Joanne's done. They say she turned the community lot into a redevelopment asset. And Jim, our mailman, he got cited for parking too long. Rachel frowned. Parking? 17 minutes. HOA limit is 12. Mrs. Doyle glanced nervously toward the corner house. They're watching everything. A few blocks down, Mr. Franklin sat on his porch swing, but it didn't swing anymore, chains replaced with firm bolts. They took the motion sensor bulbs out of my porch light, he muttered when Rachel passed. Said it interfered with the visual consistency of the street. She walked faster after that. The HOA office turned out to be a converted garage near the cul-de-sac, its windows darkened with reflective tint. Inside, a table held a tray of brochures and laminated codes. Behind a desk sat Joanne Ritter, impeccable as ever, her white SUV parked sideways across 2 visitor spots. Miss Barnett, Joanne said, flipping through a stack of forms. We didn't expect visitors this week. I'm not a visitor, Rachel replied. I'm staying with my grandfather. Lester Barnett. Joanne's eyebrows lifted, but she said nothing. She extended a tan folder labeled HOA welcome packet with a thin smile. Everything you'll need is in here. Guidelines, updates, redevelopment vision statements. Rachel accepted it but didn't thank her. Dinner that night was meatloaf and green beans, the cornbread just slightly overdone. Lester chewed thoughtfully while Rachel spread the HOA packet on the table. She said this is all public info, Rachel muttered. Only if you've got a computer, Lester said, tapping his flip phone. This thing barely gets photos from Rachel. She glanced up. You mean me? He chuckled. The old photos. I saved them as Rachel, too. After clearing the dishes, she opened the drawer next to the pantry. Her mother's old files were still there, in a cracked blue folder marked HOA 2003 to 2011. Rachel flipped through maps and letters, crinkled newsletters and old committee flyers. Then she found it, an aerial zoning map, faded but labeled, Civic Circle, common areas, designated for recreation use only. The green zone covered the very lot Joanne had mentioned in her redevelopment memo. Lester watched her closely. Something wrong? She laid the new map beside the old one. The same cul-de-sac. The same street grid. But the community lot on the new one was shaded gray and marked, pending, Phase 1. She picked up her phone and whispered. "They're carving up your neighborhood, Grandpa." The attic creaked as Rachel pulled out a decades-old file box labeled, HOA, 1985 to 1992. Dust swirled in the narrow beam of daylight from the small window above the crawl space. The cardboard box, nestled between yellowed holiday decor and a folded lawn chair, had been sealed with brittle packing tape and the unmistakable handwriting of Eleanor Barnett, elegant, firm. Rachel sat cross-legged on the floor, her slacks gathering lint, and carefully opened the lid. Folders fanned out inside like petals pressed in time. At the top, a red notebook with a frayed edge carried a post-it, meeting minutes, pre-Joanne. The familiar smell of paper and attic heat reminded her of long childhood summers spent thumbing through storybooks upstairs while her grandmother ironed downstairs. "Your grandmother used to keep everything," Lester had said. And he was right. Rachel flipped through copies of community meeting notes, faded memos typed on thin stock, and a series of aerial maps drawn in colored pencil. One dated April 1988 showed the same community lot, still green and clearly marked shared use, block events/gardens. But what made her pause was a resolution labeled 88B, with a list of names in black pen, signatures, presumably of the HOA board members then. She didn't recognize any of them. Even more troubling, she recognized some names as long-deceased residents. The handwriting for all 10 signatures was oddly consistent, almost like the same hand had forged them. She pressed a finger against her temple and exhaled. Later that day, Rachel met Mr. Ellison, the former HOA clerk, at Marty's Grill. The diner was quiet, the kind of place where vinyl booths cracked at the edges and the smell of coffee never quite left the walls. Marty himself poured 2 mugs and gave Rachel a knowing glance. "On the house," he said simply. Mr. Ellison, in a brown cardigan despite the weather, sipped slowly before speaking. "Back in '89, he said, Joanne wasn't even part of the board yet. But her uncle, well, he pulled strings. They fast-tracked 3 resolutions over Christmas. Half the neighborhood was in Florida. One of them had to do with zoning control." "Did they mail notices?" Rachel asked. "They claimed they did. But I don't remember licking a single envelope," he said with a dry chuckle. "Most of the paperwork went through a P.O. box. You miss a meeting, you miss a vote." She nodded, heart sinking. "Do you remember anything about a company called Flagstone Holdings?" Ellison's spoon clinked against his cup. He didn't answer, just stared at the Formica counter for a beat too long. Then he muttered, "Better if you don't go asking about them." Rachel's knuckles whitened around her phone under the table. That evening, back at Lester's, she printed everything, old maps, scanned signatures, conflicting clauses. The printer groaned with each page. Lester stood nearby, flipping through one with his reading glasses halfway down his nose. "This line here," he pointed, "that lot used to be the site of the 4th of July potluck. Eleanor's potato salad always won. She hated the trophy they gave, looked like a bowling pin." Rachel smiled faintly but kept working. She turned to the city's public property record website and began typing keywords. Flagstone, Civic Circle, HOA deed transfer, Joanne Ritter. The results were sparse, but one file caught her eye, a scanned deed filed February 2023, co-signed by Joanne and a corporate entity labeled Flagstone Equity Holdings. The document referred to Parcel 17B, formerly Civic Circle Green Space, preliminary designation, development corridor. She printed it immediately. The final blow came from the zoning office's database, a footnote buried in a redevelopment packet that showed an option to purchase granted to Flagstone for a portion of Civic Circle's common land. She ran the date. It had been executed 3 days before the HOA's annual vote. Quietly. Without newsletter mention. She slumped back into the kitchen chair, the pile of documents now half a foot thick. The only light came from the stove's hood lamp. Lester appeared in the doorway, rubbing his shoulder. "You okay, kiddo?" Rachel looked up, her face pale but determined. This wasn't mismanagement, it's a heist. The town church was unusually full for a Thursday night, not for worship, but for war. Wooden pews groaned under the weight of neighbors who hadn't sat this close to one another in years. The ceiling fans spun lazily, unable to cut the June heat, but no one seemed to mind. Casserole dishes, some half covered with foil, lined the folding tables near the side entrance, and the faint aroma of banana pudding mixed with old hymnals and potluck sweat. Rachel stood near the pulpit, her black slacks wrinkled from a long day and a stack of files balanced in her arms. Behind her, the old church podium bore a worn hymnal open to a page whose title no one read. She took a breath. What I'm about to show you isn't just bureaucracy gone wrong, it's deception. A murmur rolled through the crowd. She laid 2 documents side by side on an overhead projector brought out from the church's closet. The first was a zoning approval from April 2023, the second from a year prior. Same format. Same names. But the signatures, neatly aligned, strangely consistent, looked too identical. These are supposed to be 2 years apart. But look here. She pointed to a cursive E. Same slant. Same ink weight. And most important, Ellen Linwood's name appears here. From the second row, Ellen Linwood, a petite woman with a tidy gray bun and librarian's posture, blinked. "I never signed that," she said, voice flat but sure. Rachel nodded. "I believe you. That's why we're here." The tension in the room thickened. Fans clattered overhead. Lester sat near the aisle, hands folded on his lap, watching Rachel with quiet pride. Ellen rose slowly to her feet. Last December, Joanne came by with cookies and a waiver form. Said it was routine, just housekeeping. I didn't even read it. I trusted her. Someone near the back whispered, "Never trust cookies from a clipboard." Chuckles rippled through the pews, then faded as Rachel moved to the next slide. This form gives Flagstone Equity Holdings priority access to the Civic Circle Commons. But look here, no vote was recorded. No minutes filed with the clerk's office. A voice piped up, "So what now? We can't just complain forever." Rachel steadied her tone. "We vote. Not as residents who grumble in diners, but as a body, neighbors choosing to challenge the legality of the HOA's recent measures." There was a pause. People shifted in their seats. Then Lester stood. The room hushed. "They tried to turn our neighborhood into a ledger entry," he said, his voice raspier than usual but strong. "Let's remind them it's a home." Applause erupted, filling the sanctuary like a revival service. Someone wiped a tear. Ellen squeezed Lester's arm. Even skeptical Mr. Franklin nodded along, arms crossed. Rachel stepped aside as the church secretary, using an old clipboard, called for a show of hands. Nearly every hand rose, some hesitant at first, others high with resolve. A few folks mumbled concerns, but no one spoke against the motion. It was settled. Rachel was named the acting liaison to draft a legal injunction. She promised to meet with a judge the following Monday. "This won't be easy," she said, gathering her notes. "But it's ours to fight." As casseroles cooled and stories swirled over styrofoam cups of punch, the community felt a fragile kind of togetherness, one stitched from casseroles, faded trust, and a flickering hope. Mrs. Doyle leaned over to Lester and said, "Feels like 1969 again, but without the draft." He laughed gently. "Maybe we're drafting something better." Later that night, Rachel sat alone at Lester's kitchen table, reviewing affidavits. Her phone buzzed. It was a mass email from Joanne Ritter. Subject, Civic Circle Notice, 11:43 p.m. She opened it. The body read: Residents are hereby reminded, spreading misinformation may result in community expulsion. Ellen Linwood rang Lester's bell just past 6 a.m., eyes red, hands shaking, holding a manila folder. The early morning haze still clung to Civic Circle like breath on glass. Lester, in his slippers and a worn U.S. Postal Service t-shirt, opened the door slowly, surprised to see Ellen standing on his porch. She clutched the folder like it might burn her fingers if she let go. "I didn't sleep," she murmured. "I couldn't." Lester stepped aside, and she entered without waiting. The living room still smelled faintly of the coffee Rachel had brewed before driving to the county office the night before. Ellen sat stiffly on the edge of the armchair, smoothing her floral cardigan like a child about to confess. She didn't speak until Lester placed a mug of warm water in her hands. "I've been part of this too long," she said finally, voice a rasp. "It's not just zoning changes, Lester. They had me sign things, blank proxy forms. Over a year ago. Joanne said it was for convenience. I didn't question it." Lester sat across from her, silent. Ellen opened the folder. Inside were spiral-bound notepads, dog-eared and streaked with highlighter. "Meeting notes," she said. "The real ones. From my drawer. Compare them to the printed versions on the HOA site." Rachel arrived an hour later, called from the courthouse kiosk, her heels echoing sharply on the steps. She took one look at Ellen's face and set her briefcase aside. "I'm ready," Rachel said gently. At Marty's diner, the three took a corner booth. The chipped mugs were already on the table. Marty didn't ask questions, just poured and nodded once before returning to the counter. Rachel laid out both sets of minutes, the glossy, font-matched PDFs downloaded from the HOA website and Ellen's line notebook pages written in her looping script. The differences were glaring. Votes recorded in favor of redevelopment never happened. Discussions about flag restrictions were absent. One entry was even dated on a day the HOA had supposedly skipped due to inclement weather. "They changed them after the fact," Rachel said. Ellen tapped her fingers against her mug. "Joanne always said I was sentimental. That's why she let me keep the old notes. Said it made me feel useful." "She used you," Rachel corrected softly. "You weren't sentimental. You were their shield." By noon, the three stood outside a squat building behind the local pharmacy. The HOA's storage unit, officially registered as Community Document Archive, was locked with a code box. Ellen typed in the digits, her hands still shaking. Inside, the room smelled of cardboard and old ink. Metal file cabinets lined the wall. A nervous young clerk in his 20s glanced up from behind a laminate desk. He looked like someone who'd been told to expect copies, not confrontation. Rachel asked to see the latest incorporation filings. The clerk reached for a labeled drawer, then opened the one below it by mistake. A sheaf of returned mail fell out. Several were stamped undeliverable. One bore Rachel's last name. "I don't think you're supposed to see that," he mumbled, trying to scoop the papers back. She didn't blink. "You're right. But I just did." Later that afternoon, Rachel sat at the county's public records kiosk, fingers flying over the keyboard. She looked up the HOA's corporate status. Her eyes narrowed. The last recorded update had been 6 months ago, and it had lapsed. Legally, the HOA no longer had standing as a non-profit entity. She filed the complaint at once, citing fraudulent representation, coercion of residents, and falsified documents. The file sent to the Virginia Attorney General's office included scanned notes, side-by-side comparisons, and a statement signed by Ellen. Lester signed it too. Quietly. Without hesitation. "They're not just wrong," he muttered, folding the last page. "They're ruthless." The sun slipped down behind the Civic Circle oaks as Rachel closed her laptop and clicked off the kitchen light. Outside, the street hummed in its usual quiet rhythm, crickets, the faint buzz of an electric fan from next door. Then she noticed it. A black SUV parked across the street, engine off, windows tinted dark. It hadn't been there earlier. And it didn't leave. The envelope was thin, unmarked, and slid under Rachel's door in the middle of the night. It made no sound except the soft scratch against the old wood floor. Rachel stirred, blinking into the darkness, the red digits of Lester's wall clock blinking 2:11 a.m. A dog barked faintly in the distance, one of the Canella Spaniels. Then silence. She rose, toes brushing cool boards, and picked up the envelope. Inside was a single printout, Flagstone Equity Holdings, Site Redevelopment Plan. No letterhead. No signature. Just precise language about lot division, easement conversion, and timeline implementation. The final page had a faded Civic Circle overlay, her childhood backyard labeled as Section 2B, Retail Access Lane. Her stomach tightened. Downstairs, the fireplace flickered. Lester sat in his old recliner, a poker in one hand, staring into the flames. Without a word, Rachel handed him the paper. "I used to think the worst thing Joanne could do was put my roses on the violation list," he murmured. "Now." He tossed a worn HOA flyer into the fire. The edges curled, darkened, vanished. All this missing paperwork makes you wonder what they really buried. By morning, Rachel was on the landline with Ellen. "It's worse than we thought," she said. "This isn't just zoning manipulation. It's a buyout dressed as policy." Ellen listened quietly, the hiss of her old rotary phone echoing between sentences. "I have that Dropbox password. The one she gave me to help update the calendar 2 years ago. It still works." Rachel's laptop hummed as she logged in. Password, Civic Strong 2021. The folders were pristine, almost arrogant, one labeled Historic Archive, another Flagstone Discussions. Inside, she found PDFs, Excel sheets, scans. One file glinted like a dagger, Flagstone_offer_jr.pdf. She clicked. It was dated March 3rd. A digital signature from Flagstone's VP of Development. The offer, $80,000 to Joanne Ritter, conditional upon redevelopment rights executing by year-end. Buried halfway through, compensation upon smooth transfer of zoning classification and no active litigation. She stared at it for a long moment, then screen-captured everything. Rachel needed corroboration. She called a real estate agency that had recently listed homes around Civic Circle. Her voice was calm, professional. "Hi, I'm looking at homes in the Phase 2 district." "Oh sure," said the agent. "That's Civic Circle. Cute place, though most of that's going commercial." Rachel pressed. "Already zoned?" "Practically sold," the agent chuckled. "Just a few holdouts, but Flagstone's got plans. Phase 2 retail's their baby." The call ended. Rachel's hands trembled, but her voice, when she called Lester, didn't. "They've already sold the neighborhood, we're just in the way." Chuang 7, the meeting that broke the HOA. The folding chairs creaked in the gymnasium as Joanne finally walked in, hair perfect, eyes defiant. She paused just past the entrance, scanning the crowd like a politician before a speech. Her beige pantsuit caught the dim glow of the overhead gymnasium lights, and the pearls around her neck gleamed like small deflections of truth. Every seat was filled. Civic Circle Elementary hadn't seen this many residents gathered since the bicentennial potluck. Lemonade jugs and sugar cookies lined the folding table near the bleachers, untouched. Rachel stood quietly at the front, a projector humming behind her. She had stacked the papers in precise order, maps, newsletters, scanned bylaw amendments. The screen flickered to life as she cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight is about clarity, about protecting the homes your hands built and your families tended." Joanne took her seat without invitation, front row, center, legs crossed. A brief nod, curt and dismissive. Rachel clicked to the first slide. It was a map, 2 versions layered transparently. One labeled Civic Circle, 1988, with clearly drawn boundaries. The second was from 2023, showing suspicious lot lines and notations, redevelopment phase B, C. Low murmurs began. She moved methodically, emails, flagged clauses in HOA amendments, signatures that didn't match property owners. Some of you have been fined under rules that were never legally adopted, she said, eyes steady. Tonight, I want to show you why. Joanne stood abruptly. This is selective interpretation. The board reviewed all these documents under counsel. Which counsel? Rachel asked without missing a beat. We filed a FOIA request. No legal retainer exists under the HOA's records. From the audience, Ellen rose. Her voice, though wavering, carried across the room. I served on the board. I signed documents I never understood. I trusted Joanne. That was my mistake. She unfolded a paper from her purse. This is my signed confession. I won't be part of this anymore. Rachel nodded gratefully, then stepped aside as Marty, from Marty's grill, stepped up with a phone in hand. He tapped it once. Joanne's voice echoed through the room, if we push Faiza quietly, by the time they notice, we'll have leverage. People don't read newsletters anyway. A wave of silence fell like a curtain. Then, from the back, a man in a dark blazer stood. I'm Samuel Wynne, he said evenly. Attorney General's office. We've been monitoring Civic Circle HOA's records for 3 weeks now. Given the testimony and materials presented tonight, the state will initiate a full audit effective immediately. Joanne's face strained. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. 2 other board members stood and quietly exited, leaving their name placards on the folding table. Joanne, still seated, tried to regain control. This isn't how governance works. These people are being misled. But no one looked at her anymore. Lester, standing near the gym wall, clapped once. Others followed, slowly at first, then louder. It wasn't triumphant so much as it was a release, like exhaling after holding breath too long. Rachel turned away from the applause. Her eyes found Ellen, then Samuel Wynne. She didn't smile. The land is still technically theirs, unless we fight for it. Lester stood by his porch, watering the same patch of roses the HOA once fined him for. The hose glinted under the morning sun, its arc soft and steady across the flower bed. Petals soaked up the July light, their deep reds glowing like embers held over from another time. A flag rippled quietly near the fence line. Somewhere down the street, an old radio drifted up with the familiar tempo of Take 5, its saxophone teasing the summer air. He adjusted his grip, mindful of the new nozzle Rachel had bought him, and let the water settle into the roots. The ground was no longer dry and cracked. It had memory now. Healing. He paused, head bowed just slightly, as Rachel's voice lingered in his mind, it's not over, but it's ours again. Across Civic Circle, life had returned. Children pedaled bicycles across sidewalks unshadowed by clipboards. The house next door had porch bunting again, blue and white swaying gently. Mrs. Doyle, in her sun hat, waved as she passed, balancing a tray of baked beans. The HOA logo on her mailbox had been scraped off, leaving only a faint outline, like a relic of some former regime. On the porch steps, Rachel folded her DC blazer into a garment bag and zipped it shut. Her duffel lay beside it, but her hands lingered on the straps, hesitant. Ellen appeared, lemon cake balanced on a doily-covered plate. Still thinking about it? She asked, eyes on Rachel rather than the road. Rachel smiled. They want me on a land rights case upstate. It's complicated. But it's good work. You've done good work here, Ellen said, passing the plate to Lester as he joined them. Lawsuits officially entered into the court record, Rachel said, lifting a framed page from her bag. First page, signed and notarized. I figured you should keep it. Lester took the frame like it was a photograph. This going in the living room? No, he said, smiling. Right by the fuse box. Remind me what happens when you push too many buttons. The grill sparked on the far side of the street, and someone cheered as the first sizzle filled the air. Marty waved a pair of tongs like a conductor's baton. Mr. Franklin tuned a portable radio with proud precision. The folding tables filled quickly, coleslaw, buns, bowls of fruit salad. Laughter ran through the crowd, easy and honest. Kids played with sidewalk chalk again, sketching rainbows and rockets. No HOA officer circled. No notices taped to gates. Rachel watched it all, her thumb brushing her phone screen. A new voicemail glowed at the top, Office of Housing Law, D.C. But she didn't press play. Instead, she looked over at her grandfather. He adjusted the brim of his faded Vietnam vet cap and held her gaze for a long moment. "Your mom would have been proud," he whispered, pulling her into a hug that steadied them both. When the time came, Rachel loaded the car slowly. Ellen hugged her. Marty handed her a to-go box. Lester simply squeezed her shoulder before stepping back onto the porch. The hose lay coiled again, roses glistening. As the car rolled down Civic Circle, Rachel glanced to the left. Where Flagstone's lot had once stood, a new wooden sign had been staked into fresh sod. Its letters were hand-painted, a little uneven, but proud. Civic Circle Public Park, for all neighbors. She smiled, small, real, and didn't look back. On a quiet street where roses bloom again and flags flutter without permission slips, Civic Circle found its way back to itself. What began with one silenced faucet became a wave of neighbors remembering their voices, and using them. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble. Perhaps it's never too late to pull up a folding chair, share a story, and stand up together for the place we all call home. Like roots beneath the roses, quiet strength can break the hardest ground.